Have you ever wondered why some of the hardest battles you face are the ones no one else can see? Those invisible battles that rise inside your mind, tighten your chest, drain your energy, and shake your faith, even when your life looks perfectly fine on the outside. Psalm 27 speaks directly to this hidden war, and when you understand its meaning, your perspective on spiritual conflict will never be the same. Because the fiercest attacks are not always physical, they are emotional, mental, and deeply spiritual. They come in the silence of the night, in unexpected waves of fear, in the sudden heaviness that seems to appear without warning. And if you've been walking through a season where you feel watched, pressured, overwhelmed, or spiritually surrounded, this message is speaking directly to you. Invisible battles are the most exhausting because you cannot explain them. You feel the weight, but you cannot show the wound. You sense the threat, but there is no visible enemy. You struggle to stay focused, to stay grounded, to stay strong, even though everything around you appears stable. These moments reveal something profound. The fight is happening in the unseen, and only God can fully understand the depth of what you are facing. Psalm 27 begins with a declaration that cuts through every layer of fear. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? This is not poetic language. It is a spiritual weapon. It is the opening strike against anxiety, confusion, oppression, and every silent attack that tries to enter your life without permission. Because when darkness rises around you, when your spirit feels pressured, when your thoughts start racing, when doubt tries to suffocate your confidence, the truth is simple. Your strength alone cannot win this war. But the presence of God can. And what you are feeling may not be random. Many invisible battles are actually signs that something is shifting in your spiritual environment. Attacks intensify when elevation approaches. Pressure increases when breakthrough is near. The enemy fights hardest when he knows you are standing at the edge of victory. That is why Psalm 27 begins not with fear, but with identity. The battle is not about what surrounds you. The battle is about who stands with you. And maybe that's why this moment feels so heavy. Because you are not just fighting stress. You are fighting spiritual interference. You are not just fighting emotions. You are fighting intimidation. You are not just fighting silence. You are fighting unseen resistance designed to weaken your confidence and silence your calling. But what you will discover in this journey is that every invisible battle has a divine purpose. Nothing you are facing is wasted. Nothing is unseen by God, and even now He is preparing your victory in ways you cannot yet perceive, shaping your endurance, sharpening your discernment, and strengthening the foundation beneath your feet as Psalm 27 becomes your shield in the dark. You ever felt this kind of invisible pressure before? If this is resonating, share your experience in the comments, leave a like to help this message reach more people, and make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next part of this journey as we continue unfolding the power behind Psalm 27. Even when your battles are invisible to others, God sees every layer of the war happening inside you. And this is why some victories can only be formed in the secret place, away from noise, away from opinions, away from the pressure to appear strong. There are fights that counseling cannot solve, that conversations cannot explain, and that human support cannot carry. These are the battles of the soul, the ones that confront your deepest fears, your hidden wounds, your unanswered questions, and the weight of spiritual resistance pressing against your purpose. It is in these moments that God calls you into a deeper dimension of intimacy, because what He wants to strengthen inside you cannot be built in public. It must be formed in the quiet space where only His presence can reach. Psalm 27 reveals that true confidence comes from a heart anchored in God, not from external stability. When David wrote this psalm, he was not surrounded by peace. He was surrounded by pressure, accusation, uncertainty, and spiritual threat. Yet he declared that the Lord was his light and salvation, not because circumstances were easy, but because he had learned that some victories require a hidden power that only grows in the secret place. The secret place is where fear loses its voice. It is where confusion breaks. It is where your internal storms begin to bow to the presence of the one who commands the wind and speaks into silence. This is why the enemy tries so hard to keep you distracted. If he can pull you out of the secret place, he can weaken your spirit before the battle even begins. But when you enter that private space with God, something shifts. The heaviness begins to lift. The spiritual fog begins to clear. The anxiety that felt immovable begins to dissolve under the weight of divine presence. In the secret place, God exposes lies you believed about yourself, strengthens parts of your spirit that were weakened by pressure, and renews your mind until clarity replaces confusion. You begin to see that the fight was never meant to destroy you. It was meant to deepen your dependence on the one who never loses a battle. And every time you return to this hidden refuge, God builds another layer of strength inside you, another layer of discernment, another layer of courage that silently prepares you for the next step of your calling. Most people only fight in the natural realm, but invisible battles require spiritual strategies. The secret place trains you to recognize what is human and what is spiritual, what is emotional and what is warfare, what is temporary frustration and what is a direct attack against your destiny. David understood this. He knew that if he did not anchor himself in God, his fears would overpower his faith. So he created a rhythm of returning to God again and again, not as a ritual, but as survival. This rhythm becomes your shield, your stability, your quiet victory behind the scenes, where God strengthens what the battle tried to break. And the more time you spend in this sacred place, the more you realize that what happens in secret determines what happens in public. The world sees confidence, but God knows where it was forged. The world sees peace, but God knows the storms he silenced inside you. The world sees endurance, but God knows the nights he held your heart together when everything felt impossible. The secret place is not an escape from battle. It is the battleground where your victory is shaped long before it becomes visible. There is a reason Psalm 27 speaks so directly to the inner war you face. This psalm does not merely describe fear or danger, it reveals the spiritual mechanics behind the pressure, exhaustion, and emotional turbulence that rise within you during invisible battles. When David asks, "Whom shall I fear?" he is not denying the existence of threats. He is acknowledging that the true battle is not external pursuit, but internal interpretation. Fear is not born from the presence of danger, but from the belief that you are facing it alone. And this is where the invisible war intensifies. The enemy does not need to attack your surroundings if he can cloud your perception. Confusion becomes a weapon. Anxiety becomes a barrier. Emotional fatigue becomes a spiritual distraction that blinds you from what God is actually doing beneath the surface. Psalm 27 reveals that fear does not originate in the environment, but in the heart. A troubled heart interprets minor problems as major threats. A weary heart sees possibilities as dangers. A wounded heart anticipates defeat even when victory is near. David understood that the enemy first seeks access to your internal world, because once he influences your expectations, he can influence your decisions. That is why invisible battles feel heavier than visible ones. They demand more energy, more vigilance, more resilience, because you are not just fighting circumstances. You are fighting interpretations, and the root of these interpretations lies in the spiritual realm, where the enemy whispers lies crafted to weaken your faith, distort your identity, and drain your strength. This is why the declaration, "The Lord is my light," is so powerful. Light is not just illumination, it is revelation. It exposes what is real and what is imagined. It separates truth from distortion. When God becomes your source of light, the enemy loses the power of exaggeration. The shadows that once intimidated you lose their shape. The thoughts that once overwhelmed you lose their authority. Spiritual light reveals the true size of your battle and the true strength of your God. And when revelation enters the soul, fear begins to retreat. But Psalm 27 also reveals something deeper. Emotional warfare often comes from spiritual misalignment. When you step outside of spiritual clarity, you lose the ability to interpret pressure correctly. Suddenly, every delay feels like denial. Every challenge feels like an attack. Every silence feels like abandonment. This distortion is not emotional weakness, it is spiritual interference. The enemy knows that if he can distort your perception, he can influence your destiny. But when you anchor yourself in the truth of Psalm 27, you begin to see with new eyes. You realize that the presence of pressure is not a sign of defeat. It is a sign of importance. You are being opposed because you are advancing. The internal storms you face are often indicators of external promises being prepared. You feel the weight because something is shifting. You feel the resistance because something is aligning. And this psalm teaches you that fear becomes powerless when identity becomes strong. The invisible battle loses its grip when you remember that your strength does not come from stability around you, but from the presence within you. And the more you internalize this truth, the more your heart begins to steady, your thoughts begin to quiet, and your spirit begins to rise with a quiet confidence that grows beneath the surface. There are moments in your life when God does not expose you, elevate you, or even explain what He is doing. Instead, He hides you. And at first, this hiding feels like rejection. It feels like delay, invisibility, isolation, or even punishment. But Psalm 27 reveals something profound about these hidden seasons. God hides you not to limit you, but to protect your victory before it becomes visible. When David said that God would hide him in his tabernacle and keep him safe in his dwelling, he was describing a spiritual reality that many people today completely overlook. The hiding place is not a prison. It is a shield, a covering, a divine shelter where battles are fought and won, long before anyone sees the results. God hides you when the attacks against you are spiritual, not physical. He hides you when your strength is being rebuilt, when your clarity is being restored, when your foundation is being strengthened for the next season. Sometimes He removes you from environments where your spirit is too exposed. Sometimes He isolates you from people who unknowingly drain your strength. Sometimes He closes doors because the enemy had already prepared a trap behind them. And sometimes He simply withdraws you into a quieter space because what He is preparing inside you requires silence, stillness, and protection from premature exposure. God's hiding is strategic. It is intentional. It is a form of warfare that works beneath the surface. Many people misunderstand this season and assume that something is wrong with them. They question their progress, their purpose, their identity. They fear they have fallen behind. But in reality, they are being covered. They are being preserved. They are being shielded in a realm that others cannot see. The hiding place is where God interrupts the enemy's plans without the enemy ever understanding what happened. It is where He blocks attacks that were never meant to touch you. It is where He strengthens the parts of you that were weakened by invisible battles. And it is also where He prepares you for a future that requires more stability, discernment, and spiritual maturity than what you had before. The hiding place teaches you to trust God beyond visibility. You learn to move without applause. You learn to grow without validation. You learn to listen without noise. And slowly, you begin to realize that being hidden is not the absence of purpose. It is the birthplace of authority. Because what God shapes in the shadows is what He later reveals in the light. And when the time is right, the same God who hid you will lift you. But the lift will only come after the covering has finished its work inside you, forming the courage, clarity, and confidence necessary to stand where He is taking you. If you have ever felt hidden by God like this, share your experience in the comments so others walking through the same season can find strength in your journey. When you walk through invisible battles, God is not only protecting you, He is strengthening you in ways that are not immediately visible. The moments that feel like spiritual heaviness, emotional pressure, or mental exhaustion often carry a hidden purpose. They build spiritual endurance. Strength does not grow in moments of ease. It grows in resistance. It grows in tension. It grows in seasons where you feel pushed, stretched, and tested beyond what you thought you could carry. And Psalm 27 reveals that this strengthening is not random. It is intentional, strategic, and deeply connected to what God is preparing you for. David did not become strong when he sat on the throne. He became strong when he was running from threats, hiding in caves, and fighting internal battles no one else understood. His strength was not formed in applause, but in adversity. God used invisible pressures to develop a visible warrior, and the same is happening inside you. The pressures you feel are shaping capacities you will need later. The weariness you fight is forging resilience. The heaviness you sense is training your spirit to stand firm when everything around you shifts. Strength built in. Secret becomes stability when the battle intensifies. Psalm 27 shows that victory begins long before the outcome appears. When David declared that his heart would not fear, he was not denying the reality of the battle. He was redefining his posture within it. Fear weakens, faith strengthens, and invisible battles force you to choose which voice you will feed. Every moment of pressure becomes an opportunity to strengthen spiritual muscles you never knew you had. Perseverance grows in the moments when giving up feels easier. Discernment grows when clarity is nowhere to be found. Trust grows when answers are delayed. And courage grows when the threat feels closer than the promise. This strengthening process is one of the greatest acts of divine love. God does not allow you to face invisible battles to break you, but to build you for what you have been called to carry. Some assignments require deeper roots, stronger foundations, and a spirit that cannot be easily shaken. And those qualities cannot be developed in comfort. They are formed in seasons where you pray with trembling hands, stand with a trembling heart, and keep moving even when you do not fully understand where God is leading you. Strength is not the absence of weakness. It is the decision to trust God in the middle of weakness. The more pressure you feel, the more God is shaping what will hold you in the next chapter of your life. He strengthens your discernment so you can recognize spiritual attacks before they reach you. He strengthens your faith so you can walk through uncertainty without fear. He strengthens your identity so you can stand firm when circumstances try to shake your confidence. And each layer of strength formed in the unseen becomes a layer of victory that will one day sustain you when the battle becomes visible. Invisible battles demand invisible strength, and God is developing that strength inside you even now. What feels like weakness is becoming wisdom. What feels like exhaustion is becoming endurance. What feels like pressure is becoming preparation, and though you may not see the results yet, every moment is shaping you for something far greater than the battle itself. One of the greatest challenges in invisible battles is learning to distinguish what is spiritual from what is emotional. Many people fight their own hearts without realizing the true source of the conflict. They blame themselves for weaknesses that are actually warfare. They interpret spiritual resistance as personal failure, and without discernment, they exhaust their energy fighting symptoms instead of addressing the real battle. Psalm 27 provides a lens through which you begin to see clearly. It shows that not every heaviness is emotional, not every confusion is psychological, and not every moment of pressure is your fault. Some battles are born in the unseen realm long before they manifest in your thoughts or feelings. Discernment becomes essential because invisible battles disguise themselves. Spiritual warfare often imitates natural stress. It imitates fatigue. It imitates discouragement. And when you don't recognize what is happening, you assume you are simply overwhelmed, unmotivated, or losing control. But David understood that certain pressures were coming not from within him, but against him. He recognized that the enemy attacks through subtlety. He attacks your mind to weaken your decisions. He attacks your emotions to weaken your confidence. He attacks your peace to weaken your clarity. And when this begins to happen, the soul becomes confused, interpreting spiritual interference as emotional instability. Psalm 27 shifts your perspective by reminding you that the Lord is your stronghold. A stronghold is not merely a place of safety, it is a place of separation. It separates what is true from what is false, what is internal from what is external. When God becomes your stronghold, you gain the ability to recognize what thoughts come from fear and what thoughts come from faith. You begin to see what emotions are rising from past wounds and what emotions are rising from present warfare. Discernment is the dividing line between misinterpretation and revelation. This distinction matters because emotional battles require healing, but spiritual battles require authority. Emotional wounds call for restoration, reflection, and processing. But spiritual interference calls for resistance, declaration, and standing firm. And when you confuse one for the other, you treat spiritual attacks as if they were personal flaws, allowing the enemy to strengthen his influence through self-doubt and internal accusation. Discernment grows when you slow down enough to listen. When you stop reacting to every feeling and begin examining the source. When you hold your emotions up to the truth of God's word instead of letting them guide your perception. This is why David constantly returned to God's presence. He knew that clarity comes not from analyzing the battle, but from aligning with the one who sees beyond it. The more time you spend in his presence, the easier it becomes to separate noise from truth and fear from revelation. And slowly, the battle that once felt overwhelming begins to lose its grip. You start recognizing patterns. You start noticing when pressure rises without cause. You start understanding the difference between moments that require introspection and moments that require spiritual authority. This awareness becomes a shield, preventing you from internalizing what was never meant to define you. Invisible battles become less intimidating when you finally understand what you are truly fighting. And as discernment deepens, your spirit rises with a confidence that does not come from avoiding the battle, but from recognizing its true nature. Trust becomes the defining anchor in seasons where everything around you feels unclear, heavy, or spiritually unsettling. When you face invisible battles, your natural instincts demand explanations, timelines, and visible reassurance. But God often responds with silence, not because he is absent, but because trust is not built through answers. It is built through reliance. Psalm 27 reveals this truth in David's relentless confidence that God would not abandon him, even when threats increased and clarity seemed distant. Trust is not formed when everything makes sense. It is formed in the tension between uncertainty and faith, where the heart learns to depend on God, not for what he reveals, but for who he is. Invisible battles challenge every layer of your faith. They strip away superficial confidence, exposing the core of what you truly believe. When fear rises without reason, when pressure appears suddenly, when confusion tries to cloud your mind, trust becomes the spiritual force that keeps you from collapsing inward. Trust is not passive. It is an active posture, a deliberate choice to anchor your emotions and decisions in the truth of God's character. And the more the pressure builds, the stronger this anchor must become. David could declare that his heart would not fear because he had learned to trust God in darkness, not just in light. There are moments when trust feels unnatural. Your mind wants clarity. Your heart wants relief, your spirit wants confirmation, yet God invites you into a deeper kind of faith, one that does not depend on visible signs. This is where many people struggle, because invisible battles expose the gap between what they say they believe and what their heart actually holds. But this exposure is not meant to shame you, it is meant to strengthen you. Trust deepens when you stop trying to predict what God will do and begin to rest in the certainty that whatever He does will lead you to victory. Psalm 27 anchors this truth with the declaration that God is your stronghold. When the battle intensifies, He does not abandon you to fight alone. He surrounds you, upholds you, and guides your steps, even when your emotions resist His timing. Trust teaches you to walk without seeing, to move without understanding, and to believe without proof. It creates a quiet courage inside you, a spiritual resilience that remains steady even when everything else shifts. And as your trust matures, the invisible battle loses its power to dictate your emotions or determine your direction. This kind of trust is not built overnight. It grows through repeated encounters with God's faithfulness, through moments when He carried you in ways you only understood later, through battles that should have broken you but instead strengthened you. The more you recognize His presence in previous seasons, the easier it becomes to trust Him in the present. Trust becomes the light that guides you through spiritual fog, the shield that protects you from emotional collapse, and the foundation that keeps you steady while God works in ways you cannot yet perceive. Invisible battles are not won by understanding everything, but by trusting the One who sees everything. And as this trust deepens, your spirit becomes anchored in a confidence that reflects David's own unshakable posture. If you have ever walked through a season where trust felt like your only strength, share your experience in the comments so your journey can encourage someone who is facing the same silent battle. When David proclaimed, "The Lord is my light and my salvation," he was not making a poetic statement. He was revealing a spiritual strategy for surviving internal battles that threaten to consume the mind and weaken the heart. Light in Scripture is never just illumination. It is clarity, guidance, exposure, and divine direction. And when you apply the power of this declaration to your daily inner struggles, something begins to shift inside you. The darkness that once felt overwhelming begins to lose its power. The confusion that once clouded your thoughts begins to lift. The emotional turmoil that once dictated your decisions begins to settle under the weight of divine truth. Invisible battles are fueled by darkness, not because darkness is strong, but because it blinds you. It blinds you to your purpose, your identity, your authority, and your spiritual position. It blinds you to the promises already spoken over your life. It blinds you to the fact that God is working even when your emotions cannot perceive Him. This is why David understood that light had to become his starting point. Without light, every emotion becomes louder than truth. Every fear becomes larger than reality. Every lie becomes more convincing than faith. But when the Lord becomes your light, the shadows lose their shape, and the threats lose their illusion of power. Applying Psalm 27 to your internal battles means choosing revelation over reaction. It means allowing God to interpret what your emotions cannot. When anxiety rises without explanation, light reveals the deeper roots. When fear whispers worst-case scenarios, light exposes the distortion. When spiritual heaviness tries to settle over your heart, light breaks the weight by bringing truth to the surface. And slowly, you begin to see that the battle is not just about what you feel, but about what you believe in the midst of what you feel. There is a quiet strength that develops when you let God illuminate the parts of your soul that have been hidden in darkness. Light reveals patterns you never noticed, wounds you never addressed, and lies you unknowingly accepted. And although this revelation can be uncomfortable, it is profoundly transformative, because what is revealed can be healed, and what is healed can no longer control you. The enemy depends on your blindness. God depends on your willingness to see. When the Lord becomes your light, your perspective begins to shift. You stop interpreting every challenge as a threat and start recognizing the spiritual preparation behind the pressure. You stop viewing your emotions as enemies and begin to see them as indicators calling you back to alignment. You realize that fear loses its voice when light enters the room, and confusion loses its grip when truth takes its place. The power of Psalm 27 is not only in its words, but in the transformation it brings when those words become your internal posture. Invisible battles do not disappear overnight, but they lose their ability to define you when light becomes your anchor. The more you allow God's truth to illuminate your inner world, the less influence darkness has over your thoughts, reactions, and decisions. This is the quiet victory that forms beneath the surface, preparing you for the visible victories that are yet to unfold. Clarity becomes one of the greatest gifts God gives you in seasons of invisible warfare. When your mind feels clouded, when your emotions feel tangled, when your spirit feels drained, clarity can feel distant or impossible to reach. But Psalm 27 reveals that clarity is not something you produce through effort. It is something God restores through presence. Internal battles distort your perception, making small issues appear overwhelming and turning temporary moments into permanent fears. You start interpreting everything through the lens of pressure instead of peace. But when God steps in, He does not simply remove the battle, He rewrites your vision within it. Invisible battles often create mental noise. Thoughts race, assumptions grow, worst-case scenarios unfold in your mind. You replay conversations, anticipate disappointments, and expect attacks even when nothing is happening. This is not imagination, it is warfare. The enemy thrives in confusion because confusion disconnects you from truth. But David teaches that clarity comes from seeking the Lord, not from solving everything in your own strength. When he wrote, "My heart says of you, seek his face," he was revealing the key to spiritual clarity, returning to the one place where confusion has no authority. When God restores clarity, He does not change your circumstances first. He changes your internal posture. He calms your thoughts so you can hear Him again. He softens your heart so you can sense His direction. He clears the emotional fog so you can recognize what is truly happening around you. You begin to see patterns that were previously hidden, motives that were unclear, and solutions that felt unreachable. This clarity does not come from logic. It comes from alignment. When your spirit aligns with God, your perception begins to match His perspective. But clarity also requires courage, because when God reveals truth, it often challenges what you assumed, what you feared, or what you believed about yourself. It exposes areas where you allowed anxiety to guide you. It reveals places where you accepted lies without questioning them. And although this revelation can be uncomfortable, it is deeply liberating. Because clarity frees you from battles you were never meant to fight. It frees you from emotional burdens that were never yours to carry, and it frees you from cycles of fear that once dictated your decisions. Restoring clarity is part of preparing you for victory. You cannot walk into a new season with the confusion of the old one. You cannot discern God's voice if your mind is filled with noise, and you cannot fight effectively if you cannot recognize the true battlefield. This is why God works patiently within your thoughts, peeling back layers of distortion, healing the internal conflicts, and replacing confusion with understanding. As your clarity returns, so does your strength, so does your confidence, so does your ability to recognize the enemy's tactics before they reach your heart. Little by little, the mental fog lifts, the spiritual weight loosens, the emotional noise quiets, and you begin to navigate your life with a renewed sense of direction, rooted not in your own insight, but in the clarity God has restored within you. This internal clarity becomes a compass that guides you through the remaining battles, preparing your spirit for the shift that is coming. Every invisible battle you have walked through, every moment of pressure that shaped you, every season of silence that strengthened you, leads to one of the most powerful truths revealed in Psalm 27. God turns hidden warfare into visible victory. What was fought in the dark will one day shine in the light, not because you forced an outcome, but because God was building something within you that could not be shaken. David understood this transformation deeply. He knew that elevation does not begin with applause. It begins with endurance. Victory is formed long before it is seen. And when the Lord lifts your head above your enemies, it is not simply a moment of triumph, but a reflection of every unseen battle you remained faithful through. This psalm teaches that God's process is intentional. He allows you to confront fear so you can discover courage. He allows you to face resistance so you can develop resilience. He allows you to walk through uncertainty so you can learn trust. And when the time comes for your victory to be revealed, it carries a weight that only invisible battles can produce. Your spirit becomes stronger. Your clarity becomes sharper. Your faith becomes deeper. You no longer stand as someone overwhelmed by warfare, but as someone transformed through it. This is the quiet miracle behind spiritual endurance. What once felt like breaking now becomes building. What once felt like isolation now becomes preparation. What once felt like delay now becomes divine timing unfolding. When God brings you into a season of visible victory, it is not to display your strength, but to display His faithfulness. Every unseen battle becomes part of the testimony you carry. Every moment that felt impossible becomes a reminder of how He sustained you. The pressures that once made you question your purpose now become evidence of how deeply God was shaping it. And although this victory may not arrive in the way you expect, it arrives with a depth and maturity that only the hidden places can produce. But even at this point in the journey, the story is not finished. You are still being shaped. You are still being guided. You are still being led into new seasons where God will continue to reveal layers of His purpose for your life. The invisible battles do not define you. They refine you. And the victory you carry is not just for today, but for every chapter that follows. God lifts your head so you can see farther. He strengthens your heart so you can stand longer. He steadies your spirit so you can walk with greater confidence into what He has prepared. And if you have come this far, if something in this message has spoken to places inside you that you rarely share, then this journey has already begun shaping a new season in your life. You are stepping into clarity, into confidence, into spiritual authority formed quietly through every unseen battle you endured. Let this truth settle into your spirit. What God began in the shadows, He will complete in the light. If you felt this message speaking directly to your spirit, leave a comment saying, "This message was for me, so I know you received it." And if these words brought understanding or strength to your journey, make sure you are subscribed and leave a like so you can keep walking with me through the next chapters of what God is revealing. There is another message waiting for you that continues this same direction, so when you are ready, step into the next video and keep growing in the clarity God is awakening inside you.